This is TWiT.
So, you know who's disappointed? John Gruber. It's hysterical to watch because, I mean, maybe it's because he expected so much more of Apple than I did.
Well, also, can I also throw in that he also added in like the thing that makes it hurt twice as much. Like when your dad says, I just blame myself because I guess I just screwed up and expecting so much. He actually said in like paragraph in second,
I trusted you too much.
I can't believe that I didn't see this. This is the biggest mistake I've ever made in my life. Like not pointing out that they never actually shown this thing working. And that's like, oh, this is why we love you, John.
So we should probably, for those who are not like us, obsessively following
Schadenfreude.
the Apple ups and downs. It's all about Apple Intelligence, which if you've been listening to this show, I think you probably knew long ago was, struggling, not great, having a hard time. Eventually, Apple gave a statement to John Gruber's Daring Fireball, saying, "Yeah, we're probably not going to have Apple Intelligence until next year, which is 2026 in Apple, or later this year, or whatever they said. Anyway, 2026." So then John apparently went back, wrote the story, and then thought about it, stewed, if you will. He put out a piece.
Yeah, he stewed on my podcast. I caught him he was on Upgrade last week, and I caught him mid-moment where he was working through his feelings, and he used the word bamboozled at one point, and I was like, oh, wow. He's feeling it hard here. A lot of feelings going on. Yeah.
Wow. He kind of implied that Apple, something's rotten in the state of Cupertino, he said. Which is not a felicitous headline. I'm just going to say for a number of reasons. Mainly because Cupertino is a city, not a state. But anyway, okay. He said, I should have had my head examined. How I missed this. Ultimately, he says, Apple lied to us. And Apple... Oh my God, when I'm reading this, I'm going, what the hell? See, this is what comes of thinking of Apple as something other than a company.
Yep, a corporation.
A corporation.
Corporation, yeah.
This is what comes of thinking Apple is your lover. It isn't your lover. It is a company. It is dedicated to profit. Let me find the paragraph. He goes on and on and on.
You get some feelings,
my deeply misguided mental framework for Apple Intelligence. It gets worse. Apple had its... anyway, he basically says Apple has fallen off its pedestal. Apple used to be the greatest, most wonderful company in the world. But now they're just so damaged. I'm sorry, I'm scrolling through this whole thing. I should have probably...
He got a lot of feelings out. It's a good read. Yep.
So... the ride is over, he ends.
Yeah.
When mediocrity, excuses, and BS take root, they take over. A culture of excellence, accountability, and integrity cannot abide the acceptance of any of these things and will quickly collapse upon itself. With the acceptance of all three, a plague on your house, Apple. Oh, no, he didn't say that part.
Yeah.
But he was really hurt that Apple would have lied. And, is it fair to say they lied about Apple Intelligence? I think really what he kind of implied, and I think most people have said is, we even said this last week, marketing got a little ahead of what the engineering team could do.
I think that this is definitely a fight. This is where we finally get open warfare, so to speak, between engineering and marketing at Apple. This was, I think most of us noticed that when Apple announced all of these Apple Intelligence features, we didn't see even a scripted recorded demo. We saw a mock-up video of what this would look like if it were actually working. I don't think that they necessarily lied. They did marketing, and I know that's often a great. There's a big gulf. There's a hard to tell the difference between those two. But some people, I don't think I don't think John was included, but I think some people were free to think that, oh wow, this is a demo of course it's a lab demo, it's not ready to ship yet, but this is what it's going to do. Other people were able to see that this is just, again, an illustration of here's an IOU for what we hope to do. Compare and contrast with what Google has always done with Gemini, which is they will give you a really lame, highly controlled demo, but it will be like a live demo. So you can say that, wow, this doesn't look like very much right now, but at least they've showed something that was actually working. What I think my interpretation of what of reading Gruber's post was that he really felt upset about this because he felt as though marketing overstepped itself and suggested that Apple Intelligence was further along than it actually was, where they didn't have anything working whatsoever, that under those circumstances, it was extremely sketchy for them to show a mock-up of this thing actually working.
He writes, it's easy to imagine someone in the executive ranks arguing, we need to show something that only Apple could do. But it turns out they announced something Apple couldn't do. And now they look so out of their depth, so in over their heads, that not only are they years behind the state of the art in AI, but they don't even know what they can ship or when. Their headline features from 9 months ago not only haven't shipped, but still haven't even been demonstrated, which I, for one, now presume means they can't be demonstrated. This is italicized, because they don't work.
Yeah. I mean, it is, I don't know. I think part of this is that he obviously brought a little more credulity to the demos last year than most of us did. I mean, I think it's very clear that Apple felt incredible pressure to show that they were in the AI game. We've talked about it before, during, and after. Mm-hmm. And I think it was very clear that they were pushing it hard and potentially lowering their standards, right? There were some things that were very clearly going to be very hard for them to pull off, clearly not going to happen until 2025, right? Even at the time, they made no claims that those things were going to happen soon. And so, I mean, John's not wrong in saying that they felt pressure, they lowered their standards, and I don't know if I would say that they lied. Andy is right, it is marketing, and I think also there's probably a cultural disconnect, a cultural problem where somewhere someone said, well, we could probably do this. Yeah. And in normal circumstances, the executives in question would be like, that's probably is not good enough. Let's just boot it to next year. And they were not going to boot AI features to next year. They really wanted them out.
They really couldn't.
And so they lowered their standards. Now, I think that's one issue, which is someone somewhere misjudged whether they could ship this stuff in the Apple OS year that we're in right now, the iOS 18 year. So that was a mistake. The secondary mistake, and I think that this is actually a better reason for John to get mad and for all of us to be grumpy, is the marketing plan. And I go back to my thing that I've been saying for a while now about how Apple seems to only have one playbook. So they sort of have the way that when you're winning, why change anything? And clearly the marketing department was handed these features as if they were done and said, great, we'll make a commercial with Bella Ramsey where we talk about all these things that aren't going to ship maybe ever. And we'll just advertise it as if it's real happening today. And I think that was a huge disconnect and a major problem because the whole Apple Intelligence campaign started before Apple Intelligence shipped any feature.
I would like to point out that I've been saying this. I remember watching the NFL and watching these ads saying Apple's pushing these features that don't exist. Have.
Yeah.
I mean, this was, I think, obvious. Now, I guess because it's John Gruber, the entire chattering class is going crazy over this. Ben Thompson, skeeted right on, and Owen Alec says he writes, you have to read the whole thing. Gruber is a longtime follower of Apple, close to its high priests and kings. He has a historical understanding of Apple like no other. When he criticizes Apple, the situation is much worse.
I mean, is it wrong to say for our younger viewers, maybe they won't remember this, but it's the if we've lost Cronkite, we've lost the American people.
It's like that, isn't it?
Kind of moment in Vietnam where it's like when Walter Cronkite came back from Vietnam and he's like, people, this is really bad. And that's when the people in the government were like, uh-oh, like if Uncle Walter and middle America is now questioning the war in Vietnam, things are bad. Well, it's like if John Gruber is thoroughly disgusted with something that Apple's been doing, that's a bad sign.
Well,
right?
I think I think that Apple has, and we've talked about this on the show quite a few times. I think they have a no problem, which is they're not using it often enough. And I think that's been, we see this.
That's something Steve Jobs was brought to the table, right?
Right. He just where we get, you see this kind of creep of the number of products that are out at one time, this confusing process with the chipsets, the constant changing of the OS in a way that not necessarily is always forward, and oftentimes if it is forward, it's too far forward, too fast. A lot of things just not being stable, and you just feel like they're so aggressively trying to keep up with someone that is imaginary for them. I don't know who they're trying to keep up with. It's not like Apple users are going to jump ship next week, and so I think that. And again, I think that their belief that they needed Apple Intelligence there was much stronger than the actual need. And whether they needed it or not, it's a lot worse to have this happen. I think that I applaud John for, slapping him on the wrist. I think a lot of us have been talking about Apple moving too fast down the path of, their ideas rather than really making sure that it makes impact. The question really is what's going to happen next. I think
John's hurt, though, also comes from believing that Apple was something different and special, which I've never believed. And so I'm less surprised. I mean, Google did the same thing with Google Plus. I mean, this is not unusual.
I would say that Apple does tend to move a lot slower and with a lot more intentionality than most of the other companies out there. I mean, a lot of the other companies,
but they're a company. I can think of plenty of failures on Apple's part. What I can't think of, and I think Gruber's right, is I can't think of a time that Apple marketing has said they had a feature that they didn't have. But very few companies will do that. That's a fumble. Yeah. I'm just not hurt by it. I'm not. That's just they screwed up. Marketing screwed up.
That he's invested some of his own personal, worth in his calibration of being able to read and what Apple says and trust what they say and what's the level where you can trust them. And he's not wrong in saying, they lowered the bar. They did not used to overpromise at this level, to promise vaporware at this level. And I think that's the thing that bugs him the most, is that Apple has always prided itself on being a company that when you see something, when they announce something, it's either going to ship or it's very close. They have a high degree of confidence. They don't do the fear, uncertainty, and doubt. Here's some vaporware. We'll get to it eventually. It's a CES product that may or may not exist. Stuff like that. They've never played that game. And he's not wrong in saying that this Apple Intelligence announcement is a new low in terms of Apple not announcing things that don't exist. That bottom line is that here we are in March, 9 months after WWDC, and that product, those things aren't in beta. Nobody's seen them, and they may never ship.
And it feels like, again, for me, I use AI all day, every day. It's really important to me, and I just don't care when Apple gets around to it because I'm plenty full. So I have this whole thing, I don't understand why it had to happen, and it feels like just a very unforced error. In the same way that the mag charging that they announced that never came to, who cares? Who cares about that product? And so they got excited. In both cases, they got excited and had to tell us something that didn't exist when no one was really waiting for it. I just don't think, I get the analysts are really waiting for it, but I don't think that the average Apple user was like, oh my gosh, when is Apple Intelligence coming?
Maybe that's why
I'm talking about the average Apple user doesn't even
when
know
it comes to AI, they're not alone in this. Google released a video of Gemini that I fell for. I thought, wow, this is amazing. And it turned out it was fabricated. Companies have done this for years. I guess if you thought Apple was somehow special, but I've always thought Apple's a company like any other company, and they're going to make mistakes like this. I don't think it's the end of the world. I think you're right, Alex, when you say that's not why people buy iPhones. I don't think the market is the Apple customers are going to say, "Oh, I'm not buying any more Apple products. They lied."
Nobody cares. What I hope this leads to is Apple lets us just say, "Hey, for Siri, I would like you to activate ChatGPT all the time. I'm going to give you the approval for it to be just used, and let me just use that," because that's what I do right now. Is I have to fumble around to get ChatGPT to open up. And then I just start hitting the button. I sit there and talk to it about what I'm trying to figure out while I'm working. And it is seamless, but I have to just get to that first bit, and I can't just say, "Hey, Shlomo, ask a question." And I just want to be able to, as a user, I'm hoping this failure and the delay means that Apple will stop trying to protect us from ourselves and just let us have the AI that we're already using all the time.
Here, we will never know for sure, but my theory is that this decision was made not because, and this is one of the reasons it's sort of a sin, it was made not because of consumer demand. I think the consumer demand for AI is overstated. And also, as Alex points out, a lot of that demand is fulfilled by just using the apps and doing it that way. I think this was about Apple executives feeling like in the pressure cooker of the echo chamber, really, of Silicon Valley, that everybody's talking about AI, and maybe investors are worried about it, and they're worried about their stock price, and they're worried about recruiting people or retaining people because of the perception. Hiring is another reason you do stuff like this. But I don't think the Apple's thing that they usually focus on, which is consumer demand and fulfilling the needs of consumers, was a motivator here. And that is part of the problem, is that they tried to do a spin on it. A lot of these features, when you look at them and when we've talked about them, it doesn't read as Apple sensed a problem and then is using AI to solve it. All of them are Apple had an agenda to push AI into their operating system and found places to stick it, which is not the same thing as solving a problem organically because the problem existed. It's because they wanted to shove AI features in so they could make those claims. And I think the best news of this whole story is, like I said earlier, when you're going great, there's no reason to change anything. And I have to hope that after lots of behind-the-scenes grousing about Siri for 10 years and about AI for the last couple of years, that this maybe finally serves as a kind of a punch in the gut to Apple to make them say, oh, the way we're structured internally, because I don't think this is a lazy programmer somewhere. I don't think this is one bad apple in the management camp. I think this is a cultural, structural problem inside Apple that caused this to go on like this. And maybe it is the punch that they need to say, oh, we need to actually rethink things and change things and make things different. And what Alex says is absolutely right. Being able to rely on third-party AI solutions and put it in the APIs for iOS 19, providing APIs for developers to use Apple's models so that they don't have to bake in their own less efficient models when you download an app and try to run it on your iPhone. Like, there are lots of things they could do that are more Apple-like that they didn't do because they had this bad decision, and I think a broken structure internally that led to this kind of dysfunction. And it's easy to just ignore it when you're number one. And they've been number one for a long time. Maybe now they've finally gotten the message.